Um, and hopefully, we're already on a bit of a promotional campaign. I've been already meeting the people that I've worked with in South Florida to just tell them about our new code. People that do entitlement work, development attorneys, planners, that sort of thing, to explain to them that we have a new code, it's a new day in Lake Worth. Please take a look at us and see how quickly we can facilitate your representatives or your clients in investing in the city. You will also see shortly, hopefully within the next 3 weeks, an RFP that will be put out by the city. It is for solicitation of design consultants to help us facilitate and moderate 2 public forums. One would be for land entitlement entities like attorneys, land developers, landscape architects, that group, to explain the code, and we're going to have that entity help us develop some development scenarios. How does this new code work in practice? So we're going to take several sites, up to 6, and show them what can be done with that. The second forum would be more of a formal evening presentation, and we're putting together a guest list of people who have money, who may be interested in investing in Lake Worth. And it'll be run sort of like a cocktail party. It's a sales thing, and I've already got the cultural council to commit to having the party with us. And we would invite people to come and say, please take a look at Lake Worth. What sort of stimulated that idea is that when the cultural council got here, their board of directors went on a tour of the city, and many of them do have money, do have interest in Lake Worth, and I'm surprised that Lake Worth had the assets and opportunities that it did. And so we're going to sort of follow up with that and invite them back and say, now that we have a mechanism for you to invest in Lake Worth, please take a look at that and we will help you as best we can. So that will hopefully be happening. Maybe the first forum will be in December and the second forum will be in January. And I'll try to answer the questions you might have.
Sure. Anybody on the board have any questions? No? I have a quick question for you. You know, I know the non-conforming uses can often be a big hindrance to a business to move, grow, change, etc. And you kind of highlighted that really well. Can you just give a little more detail, like what were some of the hurdles before that? First of all, let's start with what's a non-conforming use. Not everybody is, an architect or a planner. What were some of the roadblocks they might have to changing their business or growing or expanding or whatever, and now why is it better for them?
Well, let's take a non-conforming use first, is a use that is not allowed in that particular location under the code currently. It may have been allowed in the past, it may have been grandfathered in when the city decided to establish zoning. Many of the more intensive vehicular uses along the railroad track are non-conforming because they're not allowed or would not be allowed today right across the street or adjacent to residential zoning districts. So if they want to expand, they can't because they really aren't allowed to be there. As long as they operate cleanly and per code, they can stay there and operate from here on out. If they want to expand or increase the intensity of their use, they can't do that. What our changes in the code did was actually create a mechanism where a lot of uses that weren't allowed before, or some of them that were considered non-conforming, are now allowed by right or through the conditional land use approval. The other piece that is the most difficult for Lake Worth is non-conforming buildings. And the largest impediment, which we removed a couple of years ago in the downtown, was if you wanted to change the use and occupancy in a building that was non-conforming, you had to meet the new parking requirement. Well, nobody has any land downtown, so we had this parking in lieu of fee, which you paid into, and you get a parking space. Excuse me, which annoyed everybody. So I've never worked in a city where we actually penalize people for having an existing building, except unless it was like residential and there was just traffic issues. So we removed that incentive, or that disincentive. So let's say that your space now is got a retail establishment in of a sort, which isn't overly high intensity, and you want to put a medical office in. Medical office is a much larger parking ratio requirement than a retail. It is still a conditional land use, but you wouldn't have to meet the new parking requirement. That is going to put strain on the city over time because parking is not well distributed in the city, and the options for parking are not great. The city has a lot of parking, but nobody can use it because it's on private property. So one thing that Ms. Lee and I have talked about is possibly trying to come up with some kind a valet system or managed parking system where we pool together all these parking lots that aren't being used, facilitate a mechanism for liability insurance, and let them be used on the off hours. Because if you drive down Dixie Highway, it looks like a bunch of empty parking lots. And they could be used by, and we've actually in the code also allowed shared parking as a mechanism to increase or improve development opportunities. So hopefully that sort of answers your question, and some of them were removed. Another one is just shortening the process so that you can actually get an answer when you call City Hall, what can I do with my property? It used to be a thesis project to figure out what you actually really do, and that has been eliminated for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of and maybe I was thinking more of the non-conforming structure itself is, once it's there, you're grandfathered, but you're stuck forever. You shut down for a month and business is shut down, or you decide to change a little bit, and you're not allowed to, so you're really stuck with these uses and these types that maybe are no longer make sense. So it sounds like you're kind of opening that up a little bit for a change in use without having to change the entire building.
We've opened up a lot, and Ms. Oliva did allude to a little bit. One disincentive that we cannot remove is that the building code treats everybody, no matter where you are in the state, the same. And if you make a substantial improvement, your building has to go up to code. If you make a significant change in use and occupancy, you have to bring it up to code. That's the building code. And most of our commercial buildings do not meet current building code requirements. And because they are so devalued, hitting the 50% threshold is very, very easy. And so there have been a number of people who want to invest in the city, and as Jonah mentioned, when they look at the numbers and see what they will be forced to invest improving the building to get it up to the building code, it doesn't make financial sense. And that's one disincentive that I'm incapable of removing.
Okay, thanks, sir. What's next? Oh, yeah, sure.
Forgive me, I'm still learning an awful lot about all of this, but I participated a number of years ago in the Vision 2020 program down in Delray Beach. And at that time, they identified the need to put in high-end yuppie housing, if you will, to attract people who would use the businesses downtown. And they started, and as you can see now, they have a lot of it, for better or for worse. Is there any discussion as you look at even the Park of Commerce or Dixie Highway of trying to put in more high-end yuppie housing to have people who would actually utilize the businesses and services here? Is that even appropriate to mention in this?
I don't think there's anything wrong with mentioning it. I think we all saw in the paper not too long ago, close by Antique Road, they're building townhomes that I think start in the $400,000 or $500,000 range. You know, it's not out of the realm of a possibility. I don't really think the market's quite there yet. I don't think we've developed enough things. I think over the years, as these new improvements go in and people get more familiar with it, it will become easier and easier to do. We have looked at Dixie Highway with NSP, but we can only buy foreclosed properties, so that's where it kind of has stopped. But if there was an opportunity for us to purchase a piece of property along Dixie Highway, and it made sense to do so, I think it's definitely an opportunity to build something, you know, maybe not that quite high-end, but close to it. Of course, with NSP money, we have to keep it, you know, relatively, you know, low cost. But I think, you know, I'm hoping that with the pressure and the focus that this group is going to put on Dixie Highway, along with our neighboring city and the changes that are happening to LDRs, that some bright people are going to come in here and say, I can build here and make twice as much because the land is so cheap. And we offer some kind of incentive that helps, whether it's for, you know, help with utilities or help with infrastructure or help with just getting them through the process, that when you add everything up, Lake Worth comes out on top. We're not quite there yet.
What I want to add, just from listening, hoping you're listening, is that in the past, the fear was, and it was somewhat legitimate, that encouraging some of the types of housing that had proliferated in other areas that are more high-end would dramatically change the overall character of Lake Worth. In the LDRs, we've eliminated the ability to do a lot of that inappropriate type development. Where a lot of townhouses were built that were double stacked, those lots aren't big enough to double stack them anymore. We've increased the setback from the street. We have limited the number of units as well as the overall length that a townhouse block can be. So it can't be a run of 15 townhouses on the road. It's limited to 6 or 120 feet, whichever you can. That was a model from architecture, and just for your education, I'm an architect as well as an interior designer. So we came up with, okay, what is the best model to work at that works from an architectural standpoint that could accommodate a number of different widths of townhouses, but not create an overall block that's overwhelming to the neighborhood. We reduced the heights in a number of areas. We've even reduced the amount of lot coverage. We've also now have a formula that respects the size of the lot when it comes to setbacks and height. So if you have a really narrow lot, you can't go the full height that's allowed in the code because you don't have a setback. So the greater the setback you have, the higher you can go up to a certain point. So what it does is creates a formula whereby what will be invested will fit into the neighborhood. And now I think that if people came in and built a higher end home, there would be much less fear that it's going to be something that's so out of character with the community that we kind of lose our charm. And that was the whole purpose of the LDR, the way it was set up, is that trying to respect the charm or atmosphere or character that people will appreciate that's anywhere in the city. So I think that now that it's clear and we know what we're doing from an LDR standpoint, there will be more propensity or probability of people investing. We did have, we have, I think, 3 or 4 new homes being built along the east of Federal Highway. 3 came in before the code changed, but they're very close to what the code requires when it comes to LDR. 1 is a little over, but it's not grossly over, and it met the deadline to come in before the code changed. And we've had some interest in some townhouse development that this would be far different than what the townhouses are that are here now, that so many people have problems with.
Thank you.
So tonight's discussion is focused on Dixie Highway. Is there part of that vision include residential along Dixie Highway? Yeah. Mixed use.
First I want to say thank you to Ms. Oliva to put this presentation, and I think one of the first steps to keep doing something with Dixie Highway. But after this, do you have some specific steps to work directly with the city, with the Chamber of Commerce, all different organizations, to keep implementing all these ideas we have here?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely put some things, as you know, in the budget next year that I think will help stimulate some more conversation and some more development along Dixie Highway. What I was really hoping for tonight was to get some suggestions from the board, some suggestions probably from the public about what are the other things that we're not doing that we should be doing. We're not a huge organization, but we do all get along really well, and we all want the same things in the city, and that is for people to have jobs and people to have goods and services, and for development to take place in a positive way. And so, like I said, there's the market study. There's talks about focusing in on one certain area or maybe 2 areas of Dixie, coming up with some kind of branding or marketing for that. There's a lot of different things that we can do. So I'm really looking to the board to help kind of steer me in the direction that you would like us to start focusing on. We are going to start a business association, a merchant association. Like I said, we've been talking about that for quite a while, obviously. And then there's the market study, but there's obviously always things we can do in the interim, and little things that might not necessarily cost money that we can help facilitate. And so I would like some feedback on that.
William, do you have someone in your department that's like a business concierge? If a business calls up that may be interested in Lake Worth, they can walk them, I mean, it's just an idea, walking them through it, or answer their questions, or, it's you.
We've been selling that in a way, and that's one reason why we argued to have the community sustainability department created, because it actually encompasses 3 different departments. We have Dolores Key, who's economic development manager of the city, but she's been tasked with some other duties, including the website, marketing, and public information officer. And so most people who want to invest in the city get to me somehow or another, and I pull together whatever parties have to be at the table to help them understand how to get their investment in the city. The Business Development Board has been a really good partner, and they brought us several good leads. And were successful in attracting a cosmetics firm last year, and a couple other entities that are working on with some interest. I think there are a number of people, the most important thing about economic development, and this is where we'll struggle with Dixie Highway, is that people want what's called shovel-ready properties. Ours, for the most part, are not shovel-ready. Though over time, as I've been here, there have been more properties that have been demolished. So those in essence are shovel-ready because there's nothing on them. They're not large parcels, but they are beginning to grow as you go down the street. And looking at that as an opportunity to sort of encourage someone to invest more, because it's not just a little piece of property here or there, it's individual properties are growing. We also probably need input from you and the public to try to come up with what I call a node system. And that is that, you know, the type of uses that we've allowed in this very long district aren't appropriate for the whole string of the district. So we might want to look at what the strategic nodes are around 7th Avenue North, 10th Avenue North, so Street of College Park, which is around 20th, and moving south, and then in between, how to tie those individual, more intense little nodes together, which I think very appropriately on the east side would be residential. That would just, you have, you could go to many larger cities as you get on the train, and you go from one little enclave to the next, there's residential in between, and there's commercial on the ends. That's kind of how I see Dixie Highway. And because it's just too long of a road to have commercial, we'll never have a need for all that to be commercial. And so that's why we created this mixed use district that has in it requirements that only a certain percentage of the overall district can be residential, only so much of it can be commercial and retail. As opposed to before it was allowed to all be commercial, and it's just, we were overwhelmed. It's trying to drink the waves of the ocean, in a sense. You know, how it's just dropping the bucket. So we're trying to encourage a variety of uses there to enliven as much of the street as possible.
You had mentioned in your presentation some of the historic preservation potential. Is the preservation board doing anything to like inventory historic properties that are already cataloged along there? Are there any segments of Dixie that might fall into a district that we can start applying for? Or?
We've done surveys. The last survey was completed in 1990, which is about 15 years too old. There are some significant historic properties along Dixie Highway, and we have talked about doing what's called a thematic nomination. I'm also a historic preservation planner too, so. And coming up with, we could identify a district and have it nominated. It's going to be tough because the individual historic resources are really far apart. And trying to come up, I would love to have all of Dixie Highway nominated as a thematic district. It would not put restrictions on the properties that would not be considered contributing. We did this in the area called Vidada near the airport in West Palm Beach. It wasn't really, didn't make it to being a historic district. We wanted some kind of protection. And there may be 27 houses out of over 50,
Right.
actually more than that, maybe 100, that were of the Mediterranean style. So we did a thematic nomination. And so we're looking at something like that. Mr. Blackman, who is the chairman of the Historic Preservation Board, is interested in that, and so is our preservation planner. And there's probably anywhere between 15 and 25 fairly significant pieces of architecture along the street, along the road. That's over, you know, a 6-mile stretch. And that's a little, the density really isn't there to really have a strong thematic district. But it could be designated, you know, an historic, like Route 66 or Motor Lodge type roadway. If we were able to encourage most of our Motor Lodge owners to restore their buildings, we'd have a much larger percentage of contributing properties. And we might look at Biscayne Drive in Miami, between North Miami and Miami Shores, as an example of how they creatively redone some of those Motor Lodges with some really cool uses.
Is that something that we could do a presentation to the business owners and get them psyched? I mean, that's probably not common knowledge, or,
Yes.
or is it?
Well, it's creativity, though it's alive and well in Lake Worth, unfortunately, a lot of our property owners either are tired of Lake Worth Way, or they haven't any money, or they're over mortgaged, or they don't live here, they live in who knows where, and they're just hanging on. And so a lot of them are going to have to be given a lot of encouragement to do anything, which is one of our biggest challenges with co-compliance, is that we can cite people all day long, But at the end of the day, code compliance cannot make anyone do anything. And it seems that a lot of people in Lake Forest or property owners are, excuse the term, hell-bent on not doing anything. And so you can see the fruit of their disinterest and neglect as you ride around the city.
You know, William, you may be one step ahead of me, but I was recently at a county business development board meeting, and you know, that organization is just outstanding. You know, they are so well organized, laser focused. I mean, I might even say obsessed with bringing new organizations to Palm Beach County. And you know, they made a good point to recognize some of the lesser financed cities, such as Lake Worth. I think actually the city manager was there as well. But you know, I'm sure you're already tapped into that resource. But you know, I just wanted to point out that you know, anything that you know, the director is just so organized and focused on bringing things throughout the county. I would imagine any help we could get from them, or any partnership we could use with them, or anything that they could offer us would be super helpful. You know, you may already have a great relationship with them, or them, I don't know, but it's certainly an excellent resource around.
Well, we're rebuilding one. I mean, as John mentioned earlier, the city of Lake Worth had sort of this marching order that we have to do it on our own, our way, it's not everything else. And we're trying to build or rebuild bridges with the county, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and Treasure Coast, because at the end of the day, the county has an interest in Lake Worth doing better, because as property values go up, the county gets more money.
Right.
And it's much cheaper for them to encourage development here than somewhere out where people can't meet concurrency or traffic requirements, whatever else. So our relationship with the county planning, building, and zoning has improved greatly.
You know, it's very clear that certain municipalities have capitalized on that organization, and others more than we have. You know, you can see the ones that bring in the development, so I'm glad to hear that we're kind of repairing that in any way. You know, and every municipality has something different to offer. We don't have large scale plots for these huge projects. We have more affordable, smaller scale, so we definitely have something different to offer, but good. Anything else from Mr. Waters? All right. So let's open up some questions for your presentation, and then what's the plan? Okay. Before we start giving suggestions, I wanted to ask a few questions myself, and I don't know if anybody else does, so anybody else have questions for Joan in her presentation? No? Could you go to the implementation slide? So Joan, you mentioned West End anchor. What is your definition of the West End, and where would that anchor be?
West End is right at the border, you know, there's the spillway and then there's West Palm Beach.
Isn't that the north?
It's just,
North end?
yeah.
Okay. So you went north end?
What did I say?
You said west?
Northwest.
Okay, well, we need one at the West End anyway, but,
Okay, so you were more, because that was my question, is I'm like, well, Dixie Highway is really, it's either the east side or the west side, so.
well, I meant the west side of Dixie Highway, but
North
north.
end, okay, gotcha. Well, then I know the northern border of Dixie Highway is, so you can stop there then. Because I was just picturing, is it at Dixie, is it further west? Office space is certainly something I hear that the city lacks, seriously. What's the view of where that might fit in, how, when? I think the max height is, what, would you say 4 stories on the west side of Dixie?
45 feet,
As far as our view of, okay, so, you know, just pick out office space, is there somewhere specific that you had sort of considered would be better suited for that?
No, I think we have to keep focused on something William mentioned and I mentioned, is kind of carving up this district into pieces that we can really make something happen. And we need a mix of uses in those areas. You can't have, you know, it doesn't make sense to have one area all residential, one area all office. But you know, over time, the market will obviously develop in the place where it makes the most sense. And I think that market information we don't have at the moment, but I'm sure that, once we do the study, it'll kind of, if we don't already know it in our head, it will become obvious to us.
Okay, so we're gonna wait for some good studies to come in. From my view, and I'm no planner, but, the biggest problem with Dixie Highway is not necessarily the buildings and the businesses, but the access. There's absolutely no way to stop and shop on Dixie Highway without being killed crossing the street. Some other cities I see are kind of narrowing and, like you said, putting in medians and landscaping and circles and traffic calming. We could build the greatest business on earth there, but how is anybody going to get there? Is there anything going on with the possibility of us sort of redoing the highway itself as a more pedestrian friendly, slower traffic? I guess more like it originally was?
I mean, to be really honest, it's a political decision that needs to be made far higher than in the city. And that's why I think working with the local municipalities is so key. They did a huge section of 441 down in Broward, and there was, I don't even know how many cities were involved in that, just for redevelopment and cut traffic down. And that's what we need here. We need to stop thinking of Dixie Highway from border to border and think of it as this opportunity that we have, where we can go in and really make a change and make it something different. But, the traffic engineers are never gonna say you need less lanes. They're never gonna say that. Your best bet is to keep hammering with, the powers that be and come up with a plan of what it is you want it to look like.
Well, of course, when you're hammer everything's a nail, so the traffic engineer, their goal is to expedite traffic, but isn't there other departments that recognize that expediting traffic isn't the sole goal on
I
Earth?
think it's slowly changing, but it's not changing fast
And
enough.
you're talking about the state level, is that the?
Yeah, you need to start at the state level, at least.
Is it even a discussion that's been opened up for our city?
It is a discussion that has been opened up, and a lot of it honestly has dealt with, doing some kind of, prototype similar to something that was done in Delray, where they, got rid of some lanes along, I believe it was Federal Highway, and narrowed it, and, quite successfully it was done. I think we need to, as part of the plan, this whole redevelopment effort isn't just about, traffic, and it's not just about office, it's about all these things working together. So when you're thinking of, what is it we need to do, then you need to put into perspective, the commercial needs, the residential needs, the office needs, perhaps the industrial needs, traffic, parks. I mean, all these things have to work together and make sense. And right now, the way that things are laid out just don't make any sense. And so I think we need to do a better job of really visioning what it is we want it to look like and how we want it to function and how we want it to interact with our neighbors for it to really become the place that we want it to be, and also have it make financial sense for investors or people who want to come there.
Are there any cities anywhere else in the country that have had a Dixie Highway